right. So, let me start off by again saying I understand and appreciate that we've sort of thrown you into the deep end right away. And that's a little bit by design, well, not a little bit, that's entirely by design. I should go over to the slides. So, having done this now for, God, a good long time, I've dithered a lot with about how to kind of do this introductory bit. And I've found that it almost always works better to kind of get to go ugly early, as it were. Because when we do that, it doesn't just get very strange once we talk about how to evaluate. And we're going to do a lot of practice, and as we do more practice, it will start to become clearer and clearer and clearer. The thing to really stress, again, is do not panic if it's not clicking yet. As we start to do some symbolizing, things will get a little bit clearer. Okay. So what I want to do for the second half here is I want to try and talk you through a couple kind of general forms of symbolization when we're doing FOL symbolization, when we're going to go from natural language, so English sentences say, into FOL. I want to give you some advice about how to do them, and I want to talk to you about 4 particular forms that we're going to have a lot of use for. And then again, if we have some time, we'll talk about the rest here, but if we don't, it's not the end of the world. So, the whole of first order logic is going to be names or variables, predicates, quantifiers, and connectives. We're going to be able to symbolize more complex expressions or sentences of English because we have these subsentential parts that TFL just didn't have. The problem, though, is we have more parts. There's a lot more grammatical flexibility in the formal language. That means it's going to be a little bit harder to do the mapping, because it's going to become closer and closer to the sort of thing we do going from one natural language to another. And just think about the myriad of English sentences you might use to capture a sentence of Dutch. And all of the lovely little grammatical variations we could have. What this means, though, is that when we're symbolizing natural language into FOL, it's important to understand the underlying structure of the English sentences. Sometimes you can move directly from English to FOL. Socrates is a man, and we've got a straightforward mapping. Other times, it's going to be useful to try and paraphrase the English a few times to get it into a structure that makes it very clear. Each paraphrase in English is going to hopefully move us closer and closer to something where it just sort of wears its structure on its sleeve. So let's do a couple and we'll try and get a feel for it. Here's our first kind of jokey one. This is Steve. Steve's a fat American, right? So let's use our, yeah? Oh, just hold on. Let's keep, we'll, thank you, hold on. Okay, so we want to use this symbolization key, right? And we want to symbolize this sentence, Steve is a fat American. Now the thing to note is, what we can do is paraphrase the English right off the bat. Because how could we paraphrase this English sentence? How can we paraphrase this sentence in English and still have the same meaning? What's an easy way to reread this? Yeah. Yeah, right? Steve is fat and Steve is American. And then as soon as we get that paraphrase, the symbolization becomes clear. This was what you were suggesting, the symbolization, right? Again, do we see just that initial move of starting with the English, and then we manipulate it in English into a form where its structure's clearer, and then it's really easy to symbolize. We did this already. We did this when we were doing TFL stuff. So, how will we do this one? Right? Well, once we do the paraphrase, it's pretty easy, right? It's going to be Steve is fat, so FS, and Steve's American, AS. FS conjunction AS. So far, so good? So, if we see adjectives like this, right? Oh, it's easy. We can just treat them as a conjunction of two different predicates, right? Problem. Let's talk about Zlatan. Does everyone know Zlatan? You should, because he's magic, right? So I want to talk about 3 sentences. Zlatan's a good footballer, Zlatan's a person, and Zlatan's a good person. Let me tell you something. He's my favorite footballer. Sentence 1 is true. Sentence 2 is true. Sentence 3 is definitely not true. Zlatan is many things, but he is not a good person. So let's think about how we would symbolize these, right? Using the lessons that Fat American Steve taught us. How would we do using this key, sentence 1? How would we symbolize this one? Sentence 1, yes. Yeah, right? Do we see, like, it's just like the one before, right? It's just like the one before, so surely that's right. GA conjunction FA. How would we do Zlatan as a person? Yeah, PA, right? Easy. We take the name for Zlatan, we take the predicate, we stick them together. And finally, our last one. Zlatan's a good person. This one, yeah? GA conjunction PA, right? Yeah. Ah, good. You've already got where I was going with this. Because remember where I started when I introduced you to Zlatan. I said 1 is true and 2 is true, but 3 is false. Problem. If we symbolize them this way, if 1 and 2 are true, 3 is 2. This is not right. This is not right. And no problems with what people said because you did it exactly like the symbolization key I gave you. But the symbolization key here is bad. Why is the symbolization key here bad? Exactly for the reason your man just said. When we think about the adjectives here, this sentence cannot be paraphrased as Zlatan is good and Zlatan is a footballer. It's telling us the kind of footballer he is. The good footballer. So the mistake here was to read this in the same way as Steve is a fat American. What we need to do here is not treat the adjectives separately, but in fact pack them into single predicates. The mistake was in fact in the key. Does everyone see the problem? So what we need to do, we got to get rid of this, and we can do that by changing the key. Let's change the key to P is a person, S is a good person, and Z is a good footballer. With this new key, avoiding the problem, how would we do our sentences? How would we do sentence 1 here? With this new modified key. Yeah, right? Zlatan's a good footballer just becomes ZA, right? In some sense, the structure gets packed into the predicate. And this one remains the same, but then how do we do our third one? Yeah, essay, right? Essay. Now, what is this point to demonstrate other than just giving me a chance to talk about fat Americans and Zlatan, which I always love? It's to highlight that when you see in natural language 2 adjectives in a row, you got to be careful Sometimes you can treat it as a conjunction of separate sentences. Steve, sometimes you have to read it as one predicate, where the one adjective is modifying the other. Zlatan being a good footballer. Well, we need to use the subscripts if they're in the key already, but otherwise we don't have to. Problem. So again, the first step here is we've got to be careful. Now this is going to be tricky sometimes because again, I know English is not necessarily our first language, but we try and paraphrase and see how it works. Yeah. We need another predicate. We need another predicate, right? If we wanted to just say Zlatan's a footballer, these aren't going to do it because the only predicates we have are good person, and good footballer. So we need to have one more. In some sense, that's a limitation, if you like, on this key. But that's all right, because much like with TFL, our keys are going to be specifically designed for blocks of sentences. The reason I wanted to talk about this was this point right down here. Got to be careful about the structure of the English when we move into FOL. Okay. That's a dirty trick, but it's an important trick to see. Now, what I want to talk to you about next is I want to talk to you about 4 kind of sentence structures that we're going to come up a lot. And these are important. It's important to see how these structures work. We're going to talk about kind of example sentences, but of course these are going to be structures that can be repeated with lots of different combinations. So let's just use this symbolization key. Our domain will be all dogs everywhere, every when. We'll have H is in the house, and J is a Jack Russell Terrier. This is going to be our symbolization key as we walk through all of these exercises for the next. Okay. And we're going to look at these 4 sentences. Every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. Some dog in the house is a Jack Russell. Not all dogs in the house are Jack Russells. And no dog in the house is a Jack Russell. Good. So importantly, if we could pack the kind of some of these predicates into our domain, specify down. But note, how would we then do no dogs in the house or Jack Russells? That sounds an awful lot like what we're basically saying is the domain's empty. Or something very much like it. That would be a problem. So there's sometimes we can move stuff into a domain. Move predicates, if you like, into. Sometimes we can pull them out. Which one we're going to find is more helpful depends on circumstance. For this exercise, it's just useful to kind of let's keep the domain description fairly small, so it's just things that are dogs, and let's pull that predicate in the house out. Good question. We'll play around with this in one of the exercises, I think, in this tutorial. So, okay, we've got our 4 sentences. We've got the 4. Let's go through them one by one. Let's start with our first one. Every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. Now, the thing to note with these is that they're all going to feature the quantifiers, right? They're all going to feature either a universal or an existential quantifier. So, every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. How would we do this one? Yeah. Ah, great. Good. I like it. Here's the problem. Let's think about what this says. So, This was your man's suggestion. And it's a very, very kind of natural suggestion. Problem. This tells us everything, every dog is in the house and is a Jack Russell. Right? What we have in red here says every dog is in the house and is a Jack Russell. Is that what the English says? The English says something a little more restrictive. It's got to be a conditional. The English tells us every dog, hey, that's in the house, all of those ones, they're Jack Russells. There could be pit bulls roaming around outside the house all you want. So it's a very subtle difference, right? But this initial version tells us everything, every dog is in the house, is an H and a J. But we want everything that's an H, then is a J. So we want this one. Again, the subtle difference here is important. That first symbolization, it tells us everything in the domain satisfies H and J. But the English tells us everything that satisfies the H also satisfies the J. Doesn't necessarily mean every dog's in the house or that every dog's a Jack Russell. There could be Jack Russells roaming around outside too. So our first one, our first structure, if we have every F is G, we can symbolize that as universal X, Fx conditional Gx. Everyone who takes the midterm passes the class. Does that mean everyone's taking the midterm and passing the class? It means that anybody who takes the midterm passes. All men are mortal. Remember from way back in the very beginning of the lecture, all men are mortal. Being a man, the only way to be mortal. Pretty sure that's not true. And I'm also pretty sure that not everything is a man and is mortal. So there's our first one. Every F is G. We use this universal conditional. It's our first one of the four. Making sense so far, or is it just not clicking? Some, okay. Again, for every F is G, you're going to have this universal conditional. Please. Oh, like kind of distributing it out? So that would say if everything's an F, then everything's a G. Which would be entailed by this, but doesn't entail this back. Again, the thing to remember, right? This tells us every F is G. It's a way to say everything that satisfies our first condition, being an F, also satisfies the second. The claim that you were giving me is a little bit stronger than that. It tells us if everything is an F, then everything is a G. Again, going to follow from this, but doesn't entail the claim we have. Question? Okay. So we got our first one. Let's move to our second one. Right, our first sentence, every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. Second one, some dog in the house is a Jack Russell. How are we going to do some dog in the house is a Jack Russell? Existential. So very much like the structure we had, but with an existential in front. Is that what I'm hearing? Fall into my trap. No, it's a very natural reading. It's a very natural reading. Now here's the problem. Remember how easy it is to make conditionals true. Remember how easy it is to make conditionals true. Or to put another way, remember how rare it is to get the combination where a conditional is false. The only time I break my promise is if I'm healthy but I don't come. So, if we think about that then, with this sentence, right? Some dog in the house is a Jack Russell. If we write it like we have here, let's grab any dog that's outside the house. It makes that sentence true. Any dog that isn't an H is going to make the conditional true. Because what happens if you have a false antecedent on a conditional? It's always true. This tells us some dog is such that if it's in the house, then it's a Jack Russell. Well, cool. Any dog that's outside the house will do this for me. So I'll go grab Mira. As long as that's not the right house, we're good. But it's really natural. So let's think. If the conditional with the existential doesn't go, what's going to be our move here? Yeah? Well, if we switch back to the universal, that's going to give us the other sentence. I like the idea. That's going to be a similar kind of problem, because then I can grab just any non-Jack Russell, and it will make it true. Yeah? Yeah, we're going to use the conjunction. So here's the way we get it, right? What does the English sentence say? Some dog in the house is a Jack Russell. It's telling us, hey, some dog is both in the house and he's one of these. There is something that is a dog and in the house and is a Jack Russell. Something satisfies those. So how do we do this one? How do we do some F is G? Existential with a conjunction. Existential with a conjunction. Now, let me stress, I know this is hard, and it's okay. That's why we're going to talk about it a lot. But our first one, every F is G. Every F is G gets the universal conditional. Some F is G gets the existential conjunction. More generally, 90% of the time, if you have an existential, it is not going to go with a conditional. Say that again because it's useful. If you have an existential, 90% of the time, it is not going to go with a conditional. Because conditionals are easy to make true, and existentials are easy to make true. Together, it gives you just something that's too damn easy. If you have a universal, almost always going to go with a conditional. Not always, but almost always. So, we did every F is G, we did some F is G. Let's talk about the next one, number 3. Before we go on, what questions do you have for me on these two? Again, feeling a little bit okay? Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so 3 and 4 we'll do together. Symbolization key is the same. Sentence 3, not all dogs in the house are Jack Russells. Sentence 4, no dogs in the house are Jack Russells. So 3 says, not all the dogs in the house are Jack Russells. How might we do this one? Not all the dogs in the house are Jack Russells. Nice. Why can we do that? Yeah. No. In the English. That's what I was looking for in the English. You got it right. Yeah. So, if we think about not all dogs in the house are Jack Russells. Not all dogs in the house are Jack Russells. What does that mean? When is that the case? Well, one way for that to be the case is that there's some dog that's in the house that's something else, right? A Chihuahua, a Pit Bull, a Dachshund. I don't care. It just isn't a Jack Russell. But we can also read it this way. It's not the case that every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. So we could literally just say, cool, negation. Every dog in the house is a Jack Russell. That's one way to do it. Literally just take the every FSG and slap a negation in front. The other way to do it is exactly as your man said. So let's talk through these two real quick, right? Our English sentence tells us not all the dogs in the house are Jack Russells. Well, if that's the case, you know what has to be false? That every dog in the house is. So we literally just take every FSG and negate it. That's one way. The other way is if not all the dogs in the house are Jack Russells, that's got to be at least one's in there that's something else. At least one thing's in the house and isn't one of those. So, two different ways to capture not all F's or G's. Two different ways to capture not all F's or G's. How would we do no F's or G's? Yeah? Yeah. We literally just take the negated sum. Because, again, if we take no dogs in the house are Jack Russells, we can paraphrase this as, it's not the case that some dog in the house is one of those, which is literally wearing the structure on its sleeve. It is the negated existential. But of course, we could also do it another way. If no dogs in the house are Jack Russells, none of the dogs in the house are of this breed, what's true of every dog in the house? That it's not one of those, right? It's not of that breed. So, if no dogs are JTRs, then we know every dog in the house is a non-JTR. And we can see the structure this is going to give us, yeah? Yeah. Not in the way we've structured it, but theoretically, I guess. Like, at least from the perspective of FOL, absolutely. Because, well, we're going to talk about this when we get to evaluating these sentences. But yes, that'll be at least theoretically an option. So we get two ways to do this one. So 4 symbolizations for these two sentences, or more generally, to give you the kind of general boxes. A sentence can be symbolized either as, there should be a negation there, sorry. Negation right there. Oh no, a typo. Negation, the universal, or as the existential with a negated second conjunct, if we're symbolizing not all F's or G's. And similarly, a sentence can be symbolized as the negated existential conjunction, or the universal conditional with the negation, if we're capturing the no F's are G's. Those four, every F is G, some F is G, not all, and none, those four kind of sentence structures are going to come up a lot. Because so many English sentences will be mapped back to these. So know how to do these four basic sentence structures. We're going to talk about them more, but that's why we spend so much time talking about them. It's useful to know how to do them. Yeah. Yeah. In this one. Leave it off. So if we leave it off, then it's the same as saying some dog in the house is a Jack Russell. So not in that case, right? Because one way that some dogs Jack Russells, if all of them are. Somebody in this room is a person. In fact, everybody in this room is a person. That's why somebody is too. Existential means there's at least one. Universal means everybody. But importantly, remember the joke about Socrates being a Terminator. Somebody's included in everybody. Okay. So, some things to recall. Let's be very clear on the important things to take away. The first one is, again, our fundamental unit. The fundamental unit of this language is now going to be a predicate attached to a term. This term could either be a name or a variable, but that's going to be our base unit. No longer just a capital letter, but always a capital and a lowercase letter together. From there, we can build up in complexity. The other big thing that we have is we have these quantifiers. The existential, the backwards E, lets us say some. The universal, the upside down A, lets us say all. And in both cases, what they do is they're attached to variables, and they're telling us how we can replace the associated variables. The existential with some things from the domain, the universal with everything from the domain. Then we got to talking about these four sentence structures. Every F is G, some F is G, not all F's are G's, no F's are G's. Know how to do these four structures, because again, we're going to come back to them a lot. They're going to come up frequently. Now, we've got just a little under 10 minutes left. I'm going to flash this. We'll talk more about this later as it comes up, but it's worth noting some funny logical equivalencies here. If you have a universal next to a negation, you can switch the places as long as you change the quantifier. And in fact, this is true for all of our quantifiers. If you have a quantifier next to a negation, you can swap places as long as you swap the quantifier. Good. So the thing to remember here is the universal tells us everything. Negation just says so everything is not tells you there's at least one that is. That's the kind of thing to remember here. We'll talk a little bit about this in the tutorials because it'll be easier to do it with the chalkboard. But yes. So don't stress about this. We'll talk about more as we go. What I want to do, just for the last bit here, is to talk to you about one of the big reasons for this language. We're going to skip the bits on paraphrase and quantifier scope. We'll talk a little bit about this stuff next lecture, because I feel like we've already hit you with enough stuff. So I want to end with something kind of fun, okay? So let's jump to this last bit here, talking about multiple quantifiers. One of the reasons why we invented this language. Now, predicates can come with multiple gaps. So far, we've been dealing just with one-place predicates. But we can have two-place predicates. Take, for example, loves. When we think about the relation of loves, there's two places. There's rooms for the lover, and there's a room for the beloved. And those could be different people, or they could be the same person. No judgment here. Self-love is important too. There could be three-place predicates, is in between, or whatever. What's important is predicates can have multiple spaces. So we could talk about is 2 meters tall, or we could talk about is taller than. Now note, once we start talking about is taller than, we have spaces, two spaces, and we can plug in different people. Or we could also plug in different variables. Here's a run-up. Gaps in a relation can be different. So take a domain of people, and let's just assume that Finn and Princess Bubblegum are in this domain, and we have our loves predicate. Now the loves predicate, we're going to write it where L is the predicate, and then the lover takes the place right next to it, and the beloved takes the second place. So how would we write Finn loves Princess Bubblegum? Using this key, how would we write Finn loves Princess Bubblegum? Yeah. Well, so importantly, the gaps here in our predicate are just ways for us to be very clear about who's doing what to who in the English. So we can literally just write it LFB. Because where it stands tells us which gap it's filling. Good. Okay. So, LFB, cool. How would we write Finn loves Finn? Again, we don't need to have the ones and twos. That's just to kind of help us make sure we got the track. But how would we do it without the ones and twos? LFF, right? Finn fills both positions. The order that they appear tells us which gap they're filling in. So Finn loves Finn, LFF. How would we say Finn loves Princess Bubblegum, but Bubblegum doesn't love Finn? Yeah. So we got LFB. What's the second part, though? But note the not. Yeah, no. Yeah, good, right? So, LFB and not LBF. Now, the important thing is, this already clears, depends on which spot you're in to tell you whether you're taking up the lover spot or the beloved spot, right? The one loving or the one that receives the love, as it were. And it matters which spot you're in. Now, our last one, how do we do Princess Bubblegum is loved by Finn? LFB, right? It's just another way to do our first sentence. So far, so good with this multiple spots? Okay. Again, it's just an extension of what we did already. Now, on the last bit, the reason why we came up with this logic. When dealing with predicates in more than one place, got to pay attention to the order. Think about who goes where. I want to talk to you about everybody loves somebody. Everybody loves somebody. Wish it was true, probably false. But there's at least two ways to read this sentence. There's at least two ways to read this sentence. One way to read this sentence is as for each person, there's someone that they love. Everyone loves someone. We hear that? Everybody loves somebody. The second way to read this sentence is everybody loves somebody. That is, there's somebody that all of us love. Note the differences there. The first one is, for each one of us, there's some person we love, versus there's one person that every single one of us loves. And the English expression, as it's written, captures both of those, or at least can fit both of those. But with FOL, we can pull them apart. And we pull them apart by quantifying into different spaces. For every person, there's some person they love. This is going to be universal quantifier, then existential. Or there's some particular person everyone loves, it's going to be existential quantifier, then universal. And those are going to come out as different sentences. They work differently. Now that sounds a little weird. So I'm just going to kind of put it up, and we'll talk more about it in the tutorials and next week. But we're going to be able to capture the difference here with just simply capturing these by different orders of quantifiers. This, I mean, not talking about love, but this is one of the big reasons why we did this. Every number has a successor. Well, we don't really want to say that there's some number that's bigger than every number. We want to say for each number, there's some number that's a successor to it. That's a distinction that this machinery lets us make that we couldn't do before. So, again, some fun little stuff. What we're going to do in the next week, though, is we're going to keep talking about the grammar for FOL, because this is hard. This is hard, right? I mean, TFL was one thing. This is different. So next week, we're going to talk more about just the grammar of first-order logic. We're going to talk more about how some of these symbolizations go. I'm going to introduce you to the last little bit of the machinery here, the identity predicate. And then we're going to define up the notion of an FOL sentence. That's going to be the big aim. What I would ask, though, this week, we're going to talk through a bunch of symbolization exercises here for FOL to kind of get a grip on how the language goes. So have a look at those. We'll talk about them Thursday and Friday. Importantly, have a lovely, lovely rest of the week, and hopefully see you guys all then.